Today I'm going to explain the sci-fi action film Jumper. Spoilers ahead, take care. The film begins in a small rural town in Michigan, where David Rice, a typical teenager, lives with his abusive father, Will. David's mother abandoned them when he was 5 years old, and the father-son relationship has been strained ever since. For the adolescent, school provides an escape from his broken home. He doesn't have many friends, but he secretly likes one of his classmates, Millie Harris. One day after school, he gives her a snow globe with a miniature Eiffel Tower replica inside. Millie, who has a dream of traveling around the world, adores it. But Mark, the school bully, interrupts their tender moment. He calls David a dork and throws the snow globe into the frozen Huron River. Despite Millie's warning, David approaches the globe, determined to retrieve it. But as he picks it up, the ice beneath his feet unexpectedly breaks. Poor David falls into the frozen water, and the current drags him away. He attempts to reach the surface but is abruptly sucked out of the water and deposited in the middle of a nearby public library. David, confused and shivering, decides to ignore what has just happened and return home. His father immediately begins yelling at him for being late for school, but the teenager is not in the mood for an argument, so he rushes to his room without speaking to his father. He then locks the room and cowers in one corner. Soon, an enraged Will starts pushing the door. Just as he is about to burst in, David vanishes and reappears at the library. At this point, he realizes that he may have an abnormal ability to teleport. He decides to put his theory to the test by concentrating extremely hard. To his surprise, he appears in his room just minutes after disappearing. Realizing that this is his best chance to escape his abusive father, David takes his savings and flees to start a new life. First, he stops by Millie's house to leave the snow globe, letting her know he's still alive and well. Next, David relocates to the city, rents a dingy motel room, and begins experimenting with his abilities. The first few times, he crashes into a tree in a local park, but he eventually gets the hang of it by focusing on images of the places he wants to visit. His first stop is at the Empire State Building, where David has fond memories of his mother, Mary. After a few weeks, the teenager is ready to use his abilities to their full potential. By this point, David understands that he can only teleport to places he can see, so he goes to a bank and gets a glimpse of the vault while pretending to use the restroom. He then teleports into the vault at night and steals bags full of cash. The following morning, the bank discovers the robbery and calls the police. Later, a mysterious man named Roland arrives at the establishment and claims he will be investigating the case for the National Security Agency. He has dealt with similar cases before and is aware of the existence of jumpers who can teleport from one location to another. In fact, he is confident that one of them did this. The scene then shifts to 8 years later, where David is living his best life. He owns a luxurious penthouse apartment in New York filled with expensive items. He is now a grown man with exceptional control over his abilities. His walls are covered in pictures of landmarks, allowing him to easily teleport anywhere in the world. One evening, he teleports to London and enters a nearby pub. David has grown so comfortable with his ability that he uses it for trivial purposes. In the pub, he disappears quickly to get close to a lovely girl sitting alone by the bar. Griffin O'Connor, another jumper present at the pub, notices his carelessness, but David is completely unaware of it, and he casually departs with the girl. Roland has cornered a jumper in Brazil's tropical forests. The young boy attempts to vanish, only to become entangled in a web of wires that electrocute him and prevent him from teleporting again. Roland is then revealed to be a paladin, a group of religious fanatics who have historically hunted down jumpers. The paladins regard people with superpowers as abominations. Roland kills the boy without hesitation, and seconds later, he receives a call about a new lead in the bank robbery investigation. The scene changes back to New York, where David returns to his apartment. He unexpectedly discovers Roland there, but has no idea who he is. The teenager attempts to kick him out, but Roland responds by hitting him with a special baton that delivers 1,000 volts of electricity. This prevents David from teleporting more than a few feet into the apartment. A fight ensues, and after much effort, David manages to teleport inside a hidden room in his wall. He then takes a bag of cash from the room and vanishes. But the experienced paladin isn't about to give up, so he sends his goons to all of David's usual jump sites. He also discovers an old picture of Millie in the cabinet, which sparks a clever idea. Meanwhile, David appears in his old room in Michigan. Following an awkward meeting with his father, he visits Millie's house. Her mother informs him that Millie works at the local bar down the street. The young man travels there, only to feel like a coward when he sees his childhood crush. David tries to leave without being noticed and runs into an adult Mark. The latter immediately recognizes him and bombards him with questions. Millie overhears his outburst and immediately joins the two men. She admits she saw David when he arrived and waited for him to say something. This makes Mark jealous, and he attempts to make a move on her, but David punches him instead. A full-fledged brawl ensues, ending with both of them being teleported while no one is watching. They soon appear in the back wallet. David was robbed earlier. He then threatens Mark before jumping away and leaving him in the vault as punishment. Later, David returns to the bar and finally speaks with Millie. She admits that she gave up her dream of traveling because she had to face the reality of having a job. On the other hand, David lies about being a banker, implying that he makes a lot of money. He then invites her to roam with him, which she gladly accepts. Griffin, unbeknownst to them, has been tracking David's movements and has overheard their plan. Meanwhile, Mark has been apprehended by the police on suspicion of robbery. Roland soon arrives at the police station, claiming to be a CIA agent. He interrogates Mark and says he believes his crazy story. The latter then tells David all about himself and Millie, the girl he has a crush on. Roland realizes that she is the same girl whose photo he discovered in David's cabinet, so he asks his men to look into her whereabouts. He soon learns that she has recently left for Rome and sends his men after her. 10 hours later, David and Millie arrive in Rome and check into a very luxurious hotel. They later go outside to enjoy the beauty of the city. In the following scene, the two walk around the Colosseum and David attempts to enter the lower level. This is when he unexpectedly runs into Griffin. David, shocked, attempts to flee, but the man teleports in front of him. He then reveals that jumpers like them exist all over the world. Following that, Griffin chastises David for carelessly jumping around. He claims that the newcomer has caught the attention of the wrong people. Meanwhile, a group of paladins enters the Colosseum and begins chasing the boys. David is immediately shocked with a baton and rendered motionless. But Griffin appears to be more familiar with the enemy's tricks. He teleports away in seconds and quickly eliminates them one by one. When the danger passes, he helps David regain his composure. Griffin then explains about the Paladin organization, which hunts jumpers like them before disappearing again. Suddenly, an employee from the Colosseum arrives and notices several unconscious bodies. She screams for assistance, prompting David to rush into the jump scar left by Griffin's teleportation. He soon appears in a secret hideout in the Egyptian deserts. Griffin is furious upon seeing him and reminds him that he abandoned Millie. David admits his mistake and rushes back to the Colosseum. Unfortunately, the police are already waiting outside to arrest them both. 8 hours later, Italian authorities are still interrogating David. They cannot make a formal arrest until the magistrate from the United States Embassy arrives. To David's surprise, when this magistrate finally arrives, it is his mother, Mary. Before he can process what's going on, she frees him from his handcuffs and tells him to run. She warns him that additional paladins are on their way. A perplexed David attempts to pursue her, but a cop gets in his way. So he teleports to the waiting room and informs Millie that he was simply released after a thorough investigation. She can't believe it's this easy, but David asks her to trust him and drives her to the airport. Millie demands an explanation upon arrival, perplexed as to why they are fleeing when everything appears to be in order. But David refuses to answer her questions and simply says they can't be together any longer. Feeling betrayed, she boards a plane and travels to Michigan alone. Moments later, David arrives at Griffin's hideout and discovers that he hunts paladins to kill them. Griffin explains that he is doing this because these evil men are after their kind. They are so evil that if they can't get a jumper, they will harm their loved ones. After hearing this, David is concerned about his asshole father, who is alone at home. But he knows Millie is safe for now because she is on a long flight. In the following scene, David teleports to his old house, only to discover his father dead on the floor. It turns out Roland had already paid him a visit. This devastates David, and he finally realizes that his carefree actions have cost him dearly. But he has no time to mourn because he needs to catch Roland before Millie arrives in the United States. A vengeful David then teleports back to Griffin's hideout, attempting to steal his diary, which contains extensive research on paladins, including the one who killed his father. But Griffin won't let him, explaining that Roland is extremely dangerous and should not be underestimated. With no other options, David proposes that they work together to defeat him. Griffin initially refuses, stating that he would prefer to work alone. But when the rookie continues to insist, he eventually agrees. Afterward, the two of them teleport to the Michigan airport, but Millie has already landed and left. This causes David to panic, and he rushes to the bar where she previously worked. He asks around for Millie, and a waitress reveals that a mysterious man was also looking for her. David realizes it's Roland and immediately teleports to Millie's apartment. Fortunately, he finds her safe and tries to explain why he suddenly appeared in her apartment, but she is still angry from the Rome incident and does not want to see him at all. When Roland and his men arrive, David quickly grabs Millie and takes her to Griffin's hideout. This enrages the experienced Jumper because he knows the Paladins have a machine that allows them to open wormholes in the scars left by the jumps. Unfortunately, Roland and his men have arrived with the machine and performed exactly as Griffin had feared. While they wait for the wormhole to open, the boys hide in a secret cave. David accidentally discovers that Griffin's research includes his own mother, Mary, who is also a paladin. Just as he is about to confront his fellow Jumper, Roland appears and captures David with his electrical wires. He kills the boy, but Griffin cuts the wires with a flamethrower. He then slams into Roland, pushing him back into the wormhole from which he came. The two continue to fight at Millie's apartment in Michigan. Meanwhile, a confused Millie cuts the wires to save David. However, she makes him promise to leave her alone after he takes her home. David accepts, but confesses that she has been his only love since they were children. As the two are having a romantic conversation, Griffin appears with the Paladin's machine. Roland, on the other hand, uses the jump scar to launch a hook that captures Millie. He then drags her back to the apartment just as the scar closes. Griffin begins preparing a remote-controlled bomb to take to the apartment following this incident. He intends to eliminate all Paladins permanently, regardless of whether Millie dies in the process. Unwilling to lose his lover, David teleports to the Colosseum and drops the bomb. Griffin immediately follows him, and they begin fighting over the detonator. They teleport all over the world, eventually arriving at a battlefield in Chechnya. Griffin ignores the war that is going on around them and retrieves the detonator. However, David jumps on him and pushes him against a pylon with a strong current. This traps the veteran Jumper for a while. Following his victory, David teleports back to Millie's apartment and discovers her tied to the wall. He foolishly rushes in to save her, but Roland strikes him with an electric baton. The Paladin then ties him to Millie with separate electric wires for his limbs. Roland believes that the current coursing through the wires will be sufficient to prevent David from escaping. Millie admits her love for David and apologizes for misjudging everything at this critical juncture. This gives him the support he needs to take his abilities to the next level. Suddenly, the entire room vanishes from the building and is transported to the center of the Huron River. David becomes dizzy underwater, so Millie swims to save him. She kisses him passionately, which prompts David to teleport them to the old library. Roland swims into the jump scar and ends up in the library. But seconds later, David lunges at him, and the two vanish from view. When the scene changes, the two enemies are in a cave in the middle of the Grand Canyon. David emphasizes that he is a good person because he could have left Roland with sharks in an ocean. He then disappears, leaving the Paladin alone in the remote cave. Many days later, David follows some clues about his mother and eventually reunites with her in a snowy area. He demands answers about what is going on, and Mary admits that she left him because she knew about his abilities. She also explains that she loves David, but all she can give him is a head start. When David hears this, he realizes his mother has joined the enemy and flees. He then meets Millie, and they teleport to a warmer location.